Great. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Spatial Finance Initiative event. My name is Ben Caldecott. I direct the new UK Centre for Greening Finance and Investment. I'm also the director of the Oxford Sustainable Finance Programme at the University of Oxford. I'm one of the founders of the Spatial Finance Initiative, which was officially launched back in February 2019 in London, in person. Hopefully many of you were there, and it built off work a number of us have been doing over a number of years, particularly focused on asset level data, a theme that we will talk about today. The initiative was established by the Alan Turing Institute, the Satellite Applications Catapult, and the University of Oxford to bring together research capabilities in space, in data science and financial services, the idea being that we could bring them together to make them greater than the sum of their parts. SFI is now one of the key programs within the new UK Centre for Greening Finance and Investment. CGFI began operations on the 1st of April and was established by the Geocated Green Finance by helping to provide the data and analytics required to integrate environmental risks and externalities into financial decision making around the world. We're the sister institute to the UK Green Finance Institute, set up to focus primarily on financing green. Both organisations were conceived as part of the UK Green Finance Task Force and announced in the UK Green Finance Strategy from 2019. So that's a bit of context and organizational history for those of you who don't know us. So as some of you will know, we define spatial finance as the integration of geospatial data and analysis into financial theory and practice. We think spatial finance is mission critical for aligning finance with sustainability, but actually we also think it's got a hugely potentially transformational role across a much wider range of financial use cases beyond those focused on climate change and the environment, although obviously that is my primary interest. We set up SFI to accelerate the adoption and mainstreaming of spatial finance through three types of interlocking activity. The first is all about creating open access asset level data sets through our GeoAsset project. You'll hear more about that. Another strand of work is around upskilling and capacity building. To really capitalize on the added value of spatial finance, we need new skills to be embedded across different types of financial institution, different types of finance profession. And the third set of activities is around promoting applied multidisciplinary research. So how can we do that in an academic context? How can we do that in a commercial context? How can we develop proof of concepts to demonstrate the value add of spatial finance? So these are all things that we are doing as part of the Spatial Finance Initiative. Now the event today is a four-part event, really. So you're in for a treat, and it's going to showcase some of the stuff we've been doing with partners across those different areas. And really glad to see so much interest in this event. So part one, you're going to hear from Christoph Christian, who is going to present our new report that's out today, called Spatial Finance State and Trends Report. This is our first annual review of the state and trends in spatial finance. We examine the underlying technological advancements and market developments in spatial finance, and we present some emerging, as well as some more mature use cases and applications for spatial finance. And this report's been very kindly sponsored by Lombard Odier. Now, the second part is a panel moderated by me, and this is focused on, we've got some great speakers, but this is focused on, what are the challenges of developing, scaling up spatial finance applications? What's the capacity within financial institutions to consume this data? What needs to happen to build trust in these data sets, in these solutions? What are the trends? What are the drivers that might increase demand for spatial finance, particularly over the next 3 to 5 years? So we've got Katie Critchlow, who's the CEO of Nature Metrics. We've got Josh Gilbert, who's the CEO of SUS Global, Adina Gillespie, who's Director of Business Development in Europe for GHGSat, and Michael Urban, who is a Senior Sustainability Analyst at Lombard Odier. So that's part two, I'm moderating that. We then have part three, which is the culmination of 18 months hard work by many people across a number of different organizations. And you're going to hear from a colleague of mine, Matt McCartan, who's been leading much of that work. And he's going to present to you new data sets we are making available, publicly available, for non-commercial use today. You can download those today. He's going to tell you what those are all about. Those are new global asset level data sets for cement and iron and steel sectors. And as you've probably gathered already, we think developing consistent, comprehensive, publicly available asset level data sets for all the sectors of the global economy is essential for doing the kinds of granular analysis we need to green financial decision making. So this is really important work. These are two sectors of the global economy that are making a very significant negative contribution to climate change. And that work has been very kindly funded by the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. And we hope that these initial data sets will be useful for many of you. And obviously we'll be seeking to constantly improve them. And we'll also be extending this work to other sectors with partners. So we have just secured some additional funding to extend all of that work through this GeoAsset project to 3 additional sectors: petrochemicals, pulp and paper, and waste management. Now, the fourth and final part is now another panel, and this is really focused on how you can use asset level databases. So you would have heard about these new asset level databases. The panel will focus on the use cases. So we're going to hear some different use cases from different organizations: transition risk analysis, emissions modeling, physical risk analysis, forward-looking portfolio risk analysis. So we've got Matt Gray, who's the co-CEO of Transition Zero, Naomi Klein, who's the CEO of Asset Resolution, Alvaro Fuster, who is at Willis Towers Watson, Associate Director for Climate and Resilience, and Caitlin Swalek, who joins us from Global Energy Monitor, one of our key partners, and she's a climate and energy research analyst. So a jam-packed agenda. As you'll see from the report, from the databases, from the presentations, the panel discussions, this is a super exciting area that's advancing in leaps and bounds, and it is a large part of the future, I think, of sustainable finance, of greening finance. But actually, as you'll see, it's actually bigger than that, I think. And the good news is our work, I know the work of many of you also, is rapidly scaling. So we're looking forward to working with many of you to unlock the potential of spatial finance. Now, before I hand over to Christoph, firstly, I want to thank Christoph, who's basically taken the lead in organizing this event and getting the report done. So thank you, Christoph. And also thank you, Matt, who you also hear from, for all of his hard work with the data sets and the team that he works with. So many other people to thank as well, of course, including our funders of the report, Lombard Odier, and of the research that's gone into the data sets, Children's Investment Fund Foundation. So over to you, Christoph. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben, for your kind introduction. Let me start by trying to share my screen. Okay. Does this work? I'm going to assume so. Okay, perfect. So thanks, Ben. And before starting with the overview of our first state and trends of spatial finance report, I would also like to thank Lombard Odier for sponsoring the report, but also contributing some of the content and some of the use cases. I'd like to thank Andrew Coote and Simon Wills from Consulting Ware for their contributions and their insights into the geospatial sector, as well as many colleagues at the Satellite Applications Catapult and Oxford Sustainable Finance Program who've all contributed to this piece of work. Now, many of you who have been following our work will know that we've been talking about this topic for a while, but this report is really our first systematic review of what we're seeing happening in this space. So firstly, we delve into some of the underlying technology advancements and market developments that make spatial finance an increasingly relevant proposition. And then we've analyzed over 300 geospatial solutions in the market to identify both the emerging and the more mature applications, and to demonstrate really that these are not just purely theoretical or futuristic concepts, but the spatial finance is already being applied today. So what is spatial finance? As Ben said, spatial finance is the integration of geospatial data and analysis in financial theory and practice. And this allows financial institutions to understand and manage risks, opportunities, and impacts related to climate and the environment in a much more granular and actionable way. Now, the reason that spatial finance is becoming increasingly relevant today is because we are seeing rapid technological advancements coincide with a rapidly growing need for climate and environmental analytics by financial institutions. So on the one hand, we've got data collection and processing technologies that are becoming ever more accessible. Satellites are becoming smaller, they're becoming cheaper, which means that a lot more are being launched and a lot more Earth observation data sets are becoming available. And these data sets, they have a couple of advantages, particularly in terms of their global coverage, They're consistently collected, and they can be collected at increasing temporal frequency, a couple of times a day, or every day, every couple of weeks. And we see the same hardware trends or technology trends happening with drones or geolocation data from IoT sensors or smartphones. Then on the data processing side, there's advances in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other modeling technologies that help us process and interpret these large and vast new data sets in a way that is a lot more easily digestible. Then on the other hand, we're seeing an increasing uptake of geospatial analytical approaches by financial institutions. And these are driven primarily by an increased awareness of the financial risks associated with climate and environmental issues, as well as by pressures coming from clients and regulators to disclose and manage these risks appropriately. We're also seeing spatial finance being used within investor engagement campaigns on specific sustainability issues, or as inputs into credit risk assessments. So why spatial finance? Why is this important? Now, climate change, biodiversity loss, and other environmental or social issues, they're inherently location-specific, they're inherently place-based, and therefore they require a spatial lens to understand them properly. And the main advantage of a spatial finance approach is that it allows you to understand risks, opportunities, and impacts in a bottom-up way. So asset-level information, which is collected from the physical asset level, can be aggregated at the company level, the portfolio level, or any geographical level, really, depending on the analysis you're after, or the financial asset you're invested in. And therefore, it offers insights that are a lot more granular and a lot more actionable compared to information sources such as corporate disclosures, for instance. Another advantage of spatial finance is the transparency that it allows for investors, but also for policymakers or civil societies organizations alike, particularly when you're leveraging third-party or open data sets, such as satellite imagery from the European Space Agency, open satellite imagery, or open asset-level databases from partners like Global Energy Monitor or others. So you're no longer relying on self-disclosed information. You can actually get third-party insights into what's happening on the ground. Now, asset-level information analysis is really at the core of spatial finance. And when we talk about asset-level data, there's really two types of data sets that we distinguish. The first one is asset data, which is information that is inherent to the physical asset, such as its location, its ownership, or its age. And there's observational data, which is a lot more dynamic or time-specific, such as emissions, productivity, or exposure to certain hazards. And this is typically collected from sensors, be they satellites, drones, or on the ground. Now, the report and also the first panel of speakers today really focuses on innovations with the observational data sets, whereas the second panel focuses more on applications based on asset data. But inherently, we believe they're a lot more powerful when combined, and there's a couple of examples later in the panel of these as well. So within the report, we provide an overview of different types of spatial finance applications that we're seeing in the market today. And we've split these in solutions that provide industry agnostic insights, that tend to start from the hazard or the risk or the impact type, like flood risk, water stress, or air pollution. And then there's solutions that provide industry specific insights that are they're mainly relevant in the context of specific individual industries, like footfall data to understand retail sales or crop yields for agriculture. So really where the observational data is translated and interpreted in an industry-specific way. And a reason for breaking down the different applications in this way is that we think, or we see actually, there's a lot of untapped potential, particularly in the industry-specific insights, to be translated into metrics that are relevant for finance. Because geospatial solutions more broadly, they're widely used. They have been widely used within a lot of these vertical industries, in the past and to date, or typically to optimize their operations. So they tend to be very much kind of operational support applications. But the use of geospatial applications within finance, we're seeing, finance, which in a way is one step more removed from these industries and their operations. This has been limited to insurance or maybe commodity trading applications, despite a growing need for investors to understand ESG performance or sustainability performance across multiple industry, more and more. Now that said, we have been seeing an awful lot of new applications and businesses, for that matter, emerge over the last couple of years in this area. So to get a sense of the maturity of the different spatial finance solutions to date, we've looked at over 300 geospatial service providers and the products and services that they are offering into the financial sector. We then group them into these 11 different types of applications that you're seeing on the graph. And they're not the distinction is not clear cut. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap between them. But then we did a kind of rough assessment of where we believe these various applications are in terms of traction. Now, applications within insurance and commodity trading have most traction. They tend to be the most mature, which also makes sense, as they tend to support a lot more operational processes, such as underwriting or claims management. But the potential for growth across other sectors of the financial system, they're significant. So basically, the whole kind of left side of the graph in introduction and growth stage, these are applications that have only really become online or available over the last couple of years. And we believe there's significant potential for these to scale and mature rapidly as both climate and environmental considerations become more mainstream within the financial sector. And that was just kind of the picture that we're seeing today. As geospatial technologies and data science continues to improve, and as adoption across the financial system will increase, new applications are set to emerge from, they can range from spatially enabled smart contracts to near real-time ESG dashboards. They will build on new and different data sets that can range from mobility data to national statistics, and they'll address a whole host of, new use cases from disclosure verification to mission-aligned investment and more. And already, in the last couple of months, we've seen new businesses and types of applications that we haven't even been able to cover in the report, come up today along some of these lines, particularly around investor engagement and more broader active ownership. So some of these you'll also see later in the webinar today. Now, as Ben mentioned, one prerequisite for this growth of spatial finance is accurate and up-to-date information about the exact location and ownership of assets in every major sector of the economy. And a piece of work we're doing at the Spatial Finance Initiative is all around using these geospatial and data science technologies to decode the real economy and to create open asset level databases for high impact industries. And Matt will go a lot more detail in the work we've been doing. But the idea is that by using these technologies and creating these data sets in a way that they can become openly available, is that this can really accelerate innovation in the sector in spatial finance, and that others can build on top of these databases to build additional product services and many more things we can't even think of at the moment. So that was kind of a whistle-stop tour of the report. But in summary, there's really 5 key takeaway messages. The first one being that, spatial finance, it allows for a much more fundamental assessment of risk, opportunities, and impacts from the physical asset level upwards. Secondly, that geospatial and Earth observation technologies, when you combine them with new data processing techniques, they generate truly global and scalable data sets. Thirdly, climate and environmental issues are inherently place-based and therefore require geospatial analytics to properly understand and manage these. Fourthly, the same technological advancements that allow us to monitor our planet and assess risks also allow us to create these global open databases and link these assets to ownership, which we need to make these analytics a lot more relevant in the context, in the financial sector context. And finally, I think, while we see and acknowledge that a lot is already possible today, there's many data challenges that still exist, and there's many issues still in spatial finance and mainstreaming it. But this is equally exciting because it means that the time is now for early adopters, both on the financial services side and innovators on the geospatial or financial analytics side, to take advantage of these advancements and really take a lead and shape the agenda of spatial finance. So that's really kind of the messages we want to take away from this report and start to think on how you can apply these yourself going forward. So that was it from me. The full report is available on the Spatial Finance Initiative website, and we'll share the link with you after the event. But now it's time to put the theory into practice and hand over to our panelists who will demonstrate how they are applying or developing spatial finance solutions today. So over to you again, Ben.
Great presentation. Thank you, Christoph. So we've got this wonderful panel, and each of the panelists has got 5 minutes to give a short presentation. I think some of them have slides. We're then going to have as much time as possible for questions. So please do think about your questions, put them in the chat or use the Q&A function, and I will do my best as a moderator to get to all of them. So the first speaker we have is Michael Urban from Lombard Odier. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. Thank you, I mean, to both of you, Ben, Christophe, and really everyone involved in organizing this event today. It really is a great pleasure to be with all of you. I thought, as a way of introduction, I would start by briefly presenting how we at Lombard-Odier think about sustainable investment through a set of 3 key questions. So if we can go on to slide 1, please. The next slide. Thank you. So those 3 questions really are at the core of the way we think about sustainable investments. The first one is the how, and that's really focused on business practices. Is sort of really the archetypal ESG approach to sustainable investment. It's focused on business practices and tends to be backward looking. An important piece of the puzzle, but on its own, not necessarily enough to make good investment decisions. The 2 very important questions where geospatial actually plays an important role are the what, which is really tackling the question of business models, tends to be more forward-looking in nature and is interested in assessing how business models are aligned with transition trajectories. And last but not least, the question of the where, and that's really focusing on business locations and how business locations, not only from an operational standpoint, but also in terms of supply chains as well as markets, are affected by the transition to a sustainable economy, as well as the results of environmental change, such as physical risks. And so really, geospatial is, in our view, opening up very interesting new analytical possibilities to answer these, specifically these latter 2 questions. And if we can go on the next slide. So as a wealth and asset manager, we ought to develop a comprehensive view on each one of these dimensions, from the macro all the way down to the micro level of analysis. And so understanding the shape and speed of the transition to a sustainable economy is particularly important from an investment decision-making standpoint. Now, for environmental challenges, we use the planetary boundaries framework, which you can see now. Essentially, planetary boundaries encompass 9 processes that regulate the stability and the resilience of the Earth system. Now, each entail a quantified notion of a safe operating limit within which humanity can continue to develop and prosper over time. Now, crossing these boundaries, on the other hand, increases the risk and generate large-scale, potentially abrupt and irreversible environmental changes. We now have, as of today, already crossed a limit of 4 out of 9 planetary boundaries. Now, the question is, why is this important to investors? And if we can look at the next slide. So without going through the details of each and every one of these industries, sort of generally speaking, it's important to investors because many, if not most industries, have a material direct dependence on these processes. And virtually all industries have a material interest in maintaining their resilience. To take just one example, the food and agriculture industry depends on healthy soils for productivity. Now, it is estimated that already today, over 1/3 of our soils are now degraded, and projections estimate that this number could reach 90% by 2050. Now, equally, climate-related physical risks, such as heat waves, but also cold waves, threaten the production as well as supply chains in the food and agriculture sector across different geographies in variegated ways. Now, if we can turn to the next slide, thank you. So now, really the question is, how does geospatial fit into this analytical framework and specifically planetary boundaries? So here we're taking as an example, deforestation, which is planetary boundary number 4. So the first step for us is to determine a deforestation benchmark, which we express here as the total of all growth forest in million square kilometers. Now, once the historical evolution of this measure is plotted, we also have to project the pathways for 2 scenarios, one business as usual scenario and one sustainability scenario. Under the business as usual scenario, it's estimated that the safe limit of this planetary boundary would probably be crossed around 2050. Now, in order to assess companies' alignment with these two scenarios, we use direct observation to determine if tree cover is in fact increasing or decreasing around a company's own assets, as well as the assets in its supply chain. If we can go into the next slide. So practically the exercise consists of gathering direct observations of deforestation around geolocated assets. So in this example, we're looking at a bauxite mine located in a pretty remote area in Brazil. Now, and this is what you're seeing first on the left-hand side of the slide. Now, using computer vision models, we can classify over a period of time for this exercise 2015 to 2020, the type as well as the quantity of forest loss that can reasonably be directly attributed to the mining assets. Now, the value of this type of exercise for an investment manager really grows exponentially as we expand our capacity to aggregate in a quasi-exhaustive way. And I think this is a very important point that I look forward to discussing, because being able to aggregate this information in an exhaustive way with asset level analytics at an entity level, not only for a firm's directly own assets, but also across its entire value chain, is really critical from an investment decision making standpoint. And this is a key challenge as well as a huge opportunity for geospatial in investment management. As the field develops, there are already many opportunities to use geospatial data to complement as well as cross-check corporate disclosure, as well as to support targeted investor engagements. I will stop here and hand over to Adina and very much look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks, Ben, Christophe, and your team for the invitation to speak today. And more importantly, thank you very much for the report. The report is excellent, and it certainly reflects our experience of the spatial finance community. I'll start by just kind of echoing what Christophe said. A lot of this capability does exist already today. So it's here. There are different applications at different levels of maturity, and the application I'll present here today is one that's reasonably mature. So GHGSat monitors methane emissions from industrial facilities. So we both use and we produce asset level data. So the open data sets that Ben talked about and Christophe talked about, those are hugely important to us. We want to ingest all of those into what we do. And then what we do is we pull in all sorts of data sets, Earth observation, other geospatial data sets, operator data sets, and we put together various models for how those emissions are happening. Our business has been driven by the operators. So as Christophe said, a lot of this capability is reasonably well understood by operators on their side of it. And in our case, the oil and gas community has been absolutely switched on. And in fact, they've invested in GHGSat. So they supported us in the launch of our first demonstration satellite, and then our 2 commercial satellites that are currently operating, and we'll have a full constellation of 10 next year. So what we do together with the oil and gas community is we build the technology and they test us. So they really push us hard. You see on this slide here an example of Total testing us. They did a blind controlled release of methane from one of their test sites in France, and they didn't tell us where it was, and they didn't tell us how much they were emitting, and they said, okay, fly over with your high resolution satellite and tell us what we're doing. And sure enough, we did, and again, we've been tested by various oil and gas companies with the new satellites, and they're all performing well. So again, reflecting what Christophe said, this capability is there. If you could just flip over to the next slide, Christophe. And if you could hit 2 more times to get through the animations there, perfect, thank you. So, you know, the CGFI report talks about aggregating data by company portfolio or geography, and that's certainly something that's in our discussions and our experience very important for the financial services communities. The only way we can get to that aggregation is actually to have attributable data. And attributable data comes in the form of high resolution. So you see here an example of a coal mining area in China where we have overlaid our satellite data. So the methane plume from this coal vent is showing exactly where it comes from. And it's this level of data that we need to aggregate back up. Where we're looking at public data sets, those that are much lower resolution. So you don't only have a few pixels covering this entire area. You really wouldn't know what assets it's coming from. So, so this high resolution capability is essential. And at GHGSat, that's actually our special sauce. So we're the only operator in the world that has the capability to do this at this level of spatial resolution. Then if you could just jump on to the next slide, please, Christoph. Thank you. So the curve on the left here is some third-party data, a study that was done in 2016, where they had 12,000 different emission sources for methane, and they captured those by the emissions rates. So the higher rates are on the left-hand side of the graph, and the lower rates are on the right-hand side of the graph. And you can see here where the satellites fit in. So the Sentinel Satellites are the European system at lower resolution, and it allows you to kind of capture the really large emissions, which there are fewer of. And then with our demonstration satellite, we could capture, you know, a big chunk of the next level up. And with the current satellites we have operating, we can see 75% of what the total emissions would be. And we also have aircraft sensors that I won't go into today, but that pushes us up to the 90% level. So we can see a lot of these emissions. Now the data that's presented there on the right-hand side, that's our actual data from the emissions we've observed in the Permian. And I've specifically chosen to show you the Permian here because this is a data set that is available already today through the Bloomberg terminal. So it's an add-on data set that the financial services community can already access. So again, coming back to the point, this is already available today. So that's really where we are. I'm happy to talk about the challenges and the scale-ups and the developments as we get into the discussion. I think the key point is coming back to Christoph's point, which is that the financial uptake has actually been a bit limited. So we have a lot of talk, but as the report says, there's a lot of opportunity in that kind of first mover on the commercial side. And we hope to see the financial services sector really picking this up. And with that in mind, we actually have just opened our London office right next door to the city. So we do anticipate that will happen. And invite anyone to give me a LinkedIn message or an email after this session. Thanks a lot, Christoph.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Ah, great. Okay, so we're going to change gears now. I'm so excited about the methane stuff because that's, yeah, it's just a hugely important area. But we're going to change tack now and look at biodiversity and nature. And I think this is an area which has oh, could you go to the next slide? Thank you. An area which is people have thought you couldn't possibly get biodiversity data at scale because it's not just a single molecule. We're not just talking about carbon. It's so complex. It's all life on Earth, and the context where you're working and the complexity of life really, really matters. So it's quite different from carbon and climate change, which we thought was hard enough. But to reverse the extinction crisis that we're facing, we've got to understand the drivers of that crisis. And the top-down measures, which we recently spoke to lots and lots of ESG data providers and realized that, you know, most of what's being provided at the moment on biodiversity to rate companies on ESG it has no relation whatsoever to what's actually happening at an asset level on the ground. And so that isn't going to provide a lever for change for nature, and it's not going to provide a lever for change for managing risk and investments. So next slide, please. So I want to tell you a little bit about Nature Metrics. My company, we use DNA to monitor nature, and so it's a much more scalable, much more comprehensive way to monitor nature and biodiversity, and therefore can be done at very large scales. So we are a scale-up company. We've got 65 employees, hundreds of global clients already all over the world, and have processed thousands of samples for many companies all over the world. Next slide, please. So what do? We find nature using tiny little traces of DNA that are left behind. So if you were in a crime scene and you touched something, you would have left behind your fingerprint and your DNA, and all species in the environment, living, breathing, pooing, weeing, doing all sorts of things, shedding skin cells, leave their DNA behind. And with very, very simple sampling equipment in the field, this little water filter that you can see in the slide, or soil or insect traps, we can trap all the little bits of DNA and then tell you all the species that were in an environment. So next slide, please. And next one again. So this method traps all the DNA from all species, whether it be from blue whales down to bacteria, and so you get an incredibly comprehensive view of life on Earth, which is what biodiversity actually is, and it's really accessible. Anybody in the field can go and take these samples, and so all the complex, difficult stuff is done in our lab in Surrey, and yeah, anyone, school children, local communities, citizen scientists, people that are on site can go and do this. So next slide. And as I said, we can do it with water, we can do it with soils and sediments, we can trap insects and not only survey the insect community, but also all the mammals and vertebrates that they've been biting on. So you can apply this technology to a whole wide range of ecosystems. Next slide. And the technology is, you know, much better in many cases than what is there before. So if you think about Darwin used netting and binoculars and things like that, and biodiversity surveying hasn't moved on a great deal since then until now. And now we've got eDNA, and also the power to combine eDNA with the remote sensing and satellites and other things like that to create this sort of wonderful new data sets that give us much better understanding of how businesses are impacting on nature, and also how nature is impacting on businesses. Next slide. This is just an example, and we had some community champions go out in marine protected areas in Mozambique. 41 samples gave us a survey of more than 300 species. Next slide. Once you get this data and it becomes a sort of big data set on biodiversity, you can also start to apply big data and more robust statistical techniques to it. So this is just one of the sort of standard ecological stats techniques called an NMDS plot, but you can start to characterize species in different environments or at different stages, from pristine to degraded. What does that sort of cloud of species tell you about the environment? And is your cloud of species that you're finding in your sample telling you that that ecosystem is healthy or unhealthy, good or bad? And this can help to start taking all that complexity of nature and aggregating it up to the simple measures that all of the financial services and companies want. But it's accepting that nature is very complex, and we need to start with that complexity and simplify up, rather than just sort of going top down and trying to oversimplify before we've understood nature. Next slide. So here's just some of the things you can get out of the soil, showing that, you know, from one single soil sample you get just a vast array of data. Here are just some sort of little trees of life of all the different species we found in some samples. So just skip on. And again, so I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes telling you about something. I've told you about how we can survey nature, and that lots and lots of companies are using this now. But we've recently launched a partnership with the Iucn, where we're going to really try and do this at scale and create a global map, initially starting with fresh water, called eBioAtlas. So next slide. Our vision is to raise £10 million to fund 30,000 samples across the 30 biggest river basins of the world. This will give us a wonderful survey of all the biodiversity living within the rivers, but also all the terrestrial biodiversity around the rivers as well, because the DNA sort of washes in. So when we surveyed, did about 100 samples of the Marañón River in the Peruvian Amazon, we got a sample of 675 different species of vertebrates from a sort of section of the Peruvian Amazon, and it was just data that would have taken decades to collect using traditional methods. So we're looking for sponsors and partners for this at the moment to create this global map. Nature Metrics is providing the data at scale, at cost. Iucn are helping us to fundraise and will be the manager of all the funds. All the data on the species records will then be made available open source for non-commercial use, and we'll have a sustainable financing mechanism so that anyone using it commercially will then pay a fee, and that will go back to funding more data. So we're really, really excited about being able to create finally a sort of biodiversity map at scale, starting with the freshwater environment. So Stepan, Robert Downey Jr. is one of our initial funders, so he's funding some of the initial sampling that we're going to be doing in Tanzania, and we launched it the other week. We've got lots of partners, and one of the really exciting things I think from a financial services perspective is we're also giving our clients the opportunity to, where they're doing asset-based commercial work with us, they're also going to have the opportunity to put that data into the eBioAtlas and make that transparent. So Anglo American, one of our clients, has already committed to doing that. So they will be making their data that we do with them commercially in their mine sites available, because my view is the best data in the world on biodiversity is held in PDFs of EIAs in company folders, and what we say is PDFs are where data goes to die, and so we want to be able to provide that mechanism for transparency for our clients. Next slide. So yeah, if anyone is interested in getting involved and helping us to fund the eBioAtlas data mapping, let us know. If you want to encourage your clients to, now think about how they can monitor biodiversity more comprehensively and also share that data transparently, that would be wonderful. And then we'd also love to talk to anyone that's interested in this sort of spatial data set for biodiversity for use in the ESG assessment and other things. So yeah, just going back to reiterate what I said at the start, biodiversity is really, really complex. It's really important that we do understand it at an asset level, and I hope that this has given you some inspiration that it's now possible. Thanks.
I think in terms of asset level data and the way that satellites are looking at things, it puts us all to shame when we're getting molecular data looking at the DNA level, but that is totally fascinating and a tough act to follow. But that's exactly what I'll do here. My name's Josh Gilbert. I'm the co-founder and CEO at SUST Global, where we're developing geospatial climate intelligence. Myself and my co-founder Gopal, we have over 6 years of experience working in the geospatial analytics sector, Orbital Insight and Planet Labs, looking at these problems saying, there is this abundance of data, there is this abundance of inputs, but actually how can you transform that into something that is transparent, validated, and ultimately usable within the financial sector? So, the Spatial Finance Initiative is one that we see as hugely important in kind of helping us in this mission to translate all of this data. And certainly thank you to everybody who's here today and watching these talks, seeing these innovators getting to work, and please do reach out to speak more with us on the panel. So next slide, please. Our mission at SUST Global is to build the climate data infrastructure that supports the next generation of financial products, processes, and services. We call it the SUST OS, and we talk about OS in terms of an operating system where ultimately we see the value for our customers, including blue chip corporates, large financial data providers, and the FIs themselves, to actually build upon these trusted, validated climate data foundations, to actually build their own platforms, their own services, their own solutions, essentially with this trusted foundational layer that they can use and understand and actually ultimately turn into metrics that are useful for them. So at the end of the deck here as well, I'll give you a glimpse into how the product looks on our side as well. And I think it may surprise some of you in terms of the beauty of satellite data and how we murder it. Next slide, please. So we transform this complex climate science into a transparent and robust financial signal. The next slide will show us how we actually do that. So we take all of these complex data sources, including asset geolocations. A great example is the one that the SFI have just released in terms of cement, as well as the power plants. We ensemble over 70 different global climate models. And these climate models are amazing. You know, they come from academia. They're really important in terms of providing a framework within which to operate. Problem is they're very coarse resolution, and often they really aren't validated or back-tested in a way that, you know, in the financial sector, risk and understanding the models is in separating signal from noise is actually crucial in any part of these businesses. So we bring in satellite data and near real-time weather data and emissions data from satellites, basically to backtest, bias correct, and super resolve these global climate models. A great example is if you're looking at wildfires. You know, the existing models work at about 100-kilometer square grid cell resolution in some of the cutting edge geospatial climate, or some of the cutting edge global climate models. With our geospatial data layers, we bring in things like burnt area indexes, like vegetation indexes, like observed instances of wildfires using NASA MODIS data, using European Space Agency data. And we can bring that resolution down, and we can bring into it as well, not just a resolution improvement, but also a level of trust, a level of validity, where you can actually see how closely these models are correlating in near real time compared to real world events. So all of this goes into the SustOS, this granular forward-looking, granular forward-looking climate data for any location on Earth, looking at wildfires, looking at flooding, cyclones, sea level rise, heat waves, as well as things like SOx and NOx and GHG emissions. And ultimately, we turn all of this data into something that's usable for financial services, whether it's FIs, whether it's the insurance sector, whether it's investors and data providers. And if there's one thing that I want to leave you with in terms of food for thought, it's on this next slide where, as I said, we absolutely, next slide please, we absolutely ruin all of this beautiful imagery. Actually, there's one slide before. This shows you the validation that we do. You know, 92% correlation in terms of the models and what's actually happened over the last wildfire season in California. And we really want to bring this to clients and just say, look, this is tried and trusted data. It's something that you can understand. It's something that does have observed instances and projections built into these models to make sure that ultimately there's a level of trust. I think trust is the most important thing that spatial data can bring in any instance, because you can see what's really going on. The next slide, interestingly, is where we serve these insights across a range of the financial sector, whether it's in real estate, reporting and disclosures, helping create new climate resilient financial products and services, because we believe that ESG is super important, but actually a lot of the ESG metrics don't really mean anything at the macro level today. And if you have tried and trusted and validated data that goes in as an input, it's really, really important in terms of creating these new markets and creating these new financial products and services. And lastly, strategy and risk management is another area. This, that's great. This is actually what the product tends to look like most of the time. We have all of this beautiful satellite data. We have a partnership with the European Space Agency where they've funded us through their ESA-ARTES business applications program to effectively do a monitoring of commodity supply chains using geospatial analytics. We're doing all of these things using NASA data, you know, Gopal's experience with Planet Labs data, mine with Orbital Insight, and then we butcher it into something that may not look as pretty, but is really, really usable and shares a common framework with the actual data sets that the financial sector tends to use in day-to-day operations. So if there's one thing to take away from this, is it's our belief that dashboards can be useful to illustrate how this data looks, but ultimately they don't work if we really want to change the financial system and build foundational layers of climate data that can be easily used by people within the financial sector. So actually, visualization is great, but really what we need is data that fits into the operational day-to-day workflows, because a lot of the time people don't want to have more friction in their work, in their use cases within the financial sector. And it's important to make sure that the data is validated, is trustable, and then actually served in a format that is usable within the financial sector. I believe that's the last one of my slides. Thank you very much for listening. Please do connect with me on LinkedIn or via email, and I'd love to follow up on questions beyond the panel that we have now.
Great, thanks Josh. And thank you everyone for those excellent presentations. So if you are a speaker, maybe you could put your camera on. We've got a few minutes for questions, please do use the opportunity to put questions in the chat. We have a couple of questions, one from a relative, a close relative, but I'm going to just pick one of his questions. Adina, so GHGSat, Arctic methane, is that a capability you have? Is that a future capability?
So Arctic methane tends to come from permafrost layers, which are widely distributed. And as I said, our high resolution satellites are, they're designed for industrial facilities. So if we're looking at industrial facilities in the Arctic, then yes. If we're looking at sort of the more distributed emissions that might come from permafrost melting, then the answer today is no. But yeah, so hopefully that gets there.
Great, thanks, Adina. Okay, I've got a question, this is my question actually for Michael. In terms of, you know, what's the capacity of financial institutions to actually use this stuff? What are the challenges that you've experienced at Lombard ODA to, you know, set yourselves up to consume and use and deploy these data sets in a meaningful way? And what lessons are there for other financial institutions?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. That is, it's a very important question. I think for us, one of the key challenges about how do we get to having comprehensive data sets at the entity level. Ultimately, we want to be able to replicate that kind of exercise that we've been talking about actually throughout the panel for a whole company and also at a portfolio level. And here we have really two key problems. One is how can we get to a point where we actually have an inventory of all the assets of a single entity? And the second one, before that can actually happen, is knowing what we don't know, basically knowing the extent of the blind spots, because as of today, it's actually quite difficult to have access through even corporate disclosure to how many assets that particular company effectively holds and what are we actually, as of today, capturing through geospatial. So I think that's an important challenge, and yeah, very excited to see that progressing through the work that you guys are all doing.
Thanks, Michael. We've got a question from Valentina. This has come up in a number of contexts. Legal considerations with some of this data, whether it's satellite data or eDNA. Are there legal use cases you guys are aware of exploring? What do you think about all of that particular kind of finance use case? Who wants to answer that? We'll try to.
I'll be honest, Ben, we haven't come up against that yet. The financial sector is really working out how they take advantage. We send them their ones and nots, and they're still working on how they use it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think this is something we're starting to explore in the context of CGFI. Basically, the potential to have back catalogs of satellite data, but also eDNA data that might then reveal litigation opportunities for people in the future. So companies might have thought they got away with something, but actually the back catalog goes back, and you can then litigate.
Yeah,
but Katie,
it is one of the things. Oh yeah, it is one of the things that eDNA is good for compared to, you know, sending someone out into the field. They say they saw something. Did they see it? Did they not? I mean, a lot of the EIAs people talk about in certain parts of the world are sort of copy paste jobs that haven't ever, no one's ever been out there in the first place. And we've got an app which we're now trying to get more sort of technology in so that you can really trace right back to the source, exactly when and where the sample was taken. You can keep an A and B sample in the fridge. And so we've even been looking from an insurance perspective. Could you have a sort of an eDNA store like a black box where you know exactly what communities were there right at the start, and then if you ever had a spill or an incident, you could use that to say this is what's there and this is what should be returned there if you're doing a restoration or a cleanup and that sort of thing. I mean, there are other implications for making the data available. So things like we're thinking through at the moment, sort of scales that you can make data available about particularly interesting protected species like pangolins. You know, you don't want someone to be able to go and pinpoint exactly where the last populations are so they can go and eat them or something. So there's all sorts of different considerations you have to think about like that when you're making data available, but none of them are sort of a reason to stop doing it, I think.
Thanks, Katie. Okay, so there's one question for Josh, but maybe you could elaborate on that in terms of, you know, how your experience of existing distribution channels, existing financial data platforms, how amenable are they to these sorts of data sets? Have you got partnerships in place? Where's that likely to go?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we keep coming up against in any of these use cases and any of these integrations is in that it's a weird one, right? Because you're projecting into the future, but a lot of the time it's asking the validation and, you know, how can we rely on this data? And obviously most of the forward-looking pathways, if you look at the SSPs, they're across, you know, like what happens in a 1 degree warming scenario, what happens in a 2.5 degree warming scenario, a 4 degree warming scenario. Like most of these models run to the year 2100, and I find it unlikely that any of us will be there necessarily to be jumping up and down saying this is right or wrong in 2100. But yeah, I think finding ways to validate the data or create confidence in the data and create trust in the data is a really important part of these partnerships. I also think that partnerships are great, especially from the innovation side, where, you know, working with some of these firms where they're serving their customers downstream with our data, it allows small startups and innovators who maybe wouldn't be given a chance at some of these large institutions to have their data used in these real financial use cases. You know, like we ran up against it in the early days where you know, financial institutions would say, you know, you're a startup, you've existed 6 months, how many staff do you have, what's your revenue, and will you be around in 5 years' time? And if you're an early stage startup, you don't know the answers to any of those questions, especially the last one. So, you know, I think channels and partnerships are really, really important parts of any of this process. And actually, like initiatives like this, right, having the ecosystem, having startups speaking with, you know, over, what is it, 185 different finance professionals, I think building that trust and building that understanding is really important. And you look at the hires that these banks and these financial institutions are making as well now, and going from ESG to understanding climatology in terms of some of the people that they're bringing in-house, I think is also going to be a really, really crucial step in order to ultimately being able to like translate these different data sets.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Okay, so I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to ask one question, the same question to each of you, and this actually is coming from Steve Rees, a colleague at Oxford, a very good researcher type question. Can you think of where novel AI or improvements in existing AI could improve your data products? Maybe starting with Adina and then going onwards.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. The main one is actually novel AI for seeking out the assets. So we've talked a lot about where are the company's assets and getting that location data and how important that is as the underpinning. So from our point of view, you know, we're always looking for that, and the AI and machine learning techniques that we're applying to all sorts of different data to crack that nut is an essential part of the business. So hence the reason we're really excited about your petrochemical and your waste management data sets coming out.
Right answer, Adina.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ben.
Katie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I alluded to it a little bit in the talk. We're looking at things like, you know, if you wanted to understand soil health, or you wanted to understand the health of coastal marine ecosystems, we believe that if you have enough data sets and you have these, you know, you can have hundreds of or thousands of points or species per sample, you can start to characterize a gradient of good to poor, or you can look at where tipping points might be in an ecosystem. And so we're currently reorientating all our data at the moment and storing it in a different way so that we can start to mine the data and really understand, you know, by looking across all of the different clients we're working with, as say in the coastal marine ecosystems or in soil health, to understand how we can pull out from a single sample more intelligence on what that ecosystem is telling us. And, you know, there's all sorts of applications for that. You know, the nature-based solution guys are coming to us at the moment and saying, oh, could you monitor the nature in a nature-based solution? You know, are there dolphins in my reef or whatever? But actually, you know, from an investment perspective, you're investing in a living asset and understanding whether that asset is resilient, whether it's capable of storing carbon, you know, what's happening, are there some herbivores that are just about to come in influx and eat all your carbon? All this sort of thing is actually much, much more interesting than just adding a bit of value by telling nice stories about biodiversity. So I think we're only just scratching the surface now, because this is a new biological data layer for the Earth, and because biological data is inherently so complex, it is a huge big data problem to be able to filter out the sort of the interesting interactions from all the noise that's going on in an environment. But yeah, we're very excited about the future for what we can use big data techniques for.
Thanks, Katie. And I think also the point you're also making before around, you know, there's kind of a mosaic here of different sources of data, different sensors that, you know, so how do we bring all those together in different, it's not just solely about satellite data, it's also about different forms of sensor. Josh, over to you next.
I think that more AI is not the answer. I think we actually have an incredible abundance of amazing technology coming to market. I think the fundamental thing that I wish we had more of, and the thing that I think we should focus on, is actually the mechanisms to ingest all of this data in a meaningful way within the financial sector. You know, I think that, like, ultimately the AI part, if you're doing object detection, is very, very difficult to do. If you're looking at an asset from the sky and being able to say, this is what it is, it's one thing. It's the second thing to say, who owns it? What's the throughput? What's the econometric data? What's the output data, the production data? Obviously that is siloed data, it does exist. So I think actually creating the mechanisms to kind of connect the dots between all of these different data silos and actually kind of create new mechanisms to bring this data into the financial sector, into real world use cases, like, you know, assessing risk in mortgage pools or creating new securitized products built upon climate resilient data. I know it's a bit of a dead cat, but I think that we have, you know, incredible AI technology coming to market now, and I think really it's a case of solving these problems in meaningful ways for the actual end users.
Yeah, that's a really helpful contribution. Thanks, Josh. And Michael, you've got the final word.
Thanks, Ben. Well, I mean, obviously, I come last after a lot of people that are involved with data creation. I'm merely a data user, really. But I guess my main point on this is actually related to attribution. I think there's a very important question. And if you look at the use case that I showed earlier for deforestation, this is a use case for a remote area where there's a single asset. Now, of course, it becomes increasingly complex when you're thinking about densely developed areas on how do you actually go about making those attributions for a variety of things, be it deforestation or emissions as well. So I think the attribution question is an important one, and possibly one where AI has an important role to play.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. Well, a fascinating panel. Thank you for your presentations and your contributions. Round of applause, big claps. And we're now going to head over to Matthew, my colleague, who's going to give a presentation on these databases. Thanks, guys. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Ben. I'll just share my screen here.
All good.
Cool. Okay. Hi, everyone. So yeah, today I'll be presenting an overview of the work we've been doing around creating these asset level data sets for the cement and iron and steel sectors. So obviously both of these sectors are incredibly important. They're high impact, particularly from a climate perspective, and account for around 5 or 6% of global CO2 emissions apiece. So in order to really understand these sectors at a granular level, we need to do some asset level based assessments, but the existing asset level data sets have a number of deficiencies which make it more difficult to undertake these assessments. So most asset level data sets for these sectors at the moment are proprietary in nature. They have significant gaps, so only covering around 70% of global assets. And they also don't necessarily provide the needed information to undertake these types of detailed assessments. So most data sets won't provide information about the exact location of assets or the coordinates. And they also don't provide a detailed breakdown of the ownership information. So what we've been working on is trying to overcome some of these issues by developing an open source, complete and regularly updated global asset level data sets for both of these sectors. So within these data sets, we provide exact details about the exact location of assets, as well as a detailed breakdown of the ownership of the asset, and some detailed information about the assets themselves. So providing information about the production process that's being used, the capacity, and the year production first started. So with these types of complete open source global asset level data sets, we can start to better understand the risks, impacts, and opportunities associated with these sectors. And there's a whole host of different use cases that can be applied across a variety of different stakeholders. So in order to develop these data sets, we've used a variety of different methods. So these include using machine learning and remote sensing, a lot of kind of manual curation work, as well as the use of some crowdsourcing to help out with some annotation of some sites. So this is just basically an illustration of that kind of machine learning, remote sensing type approach. So we started out with some training data based on some sites where we knew the exact coordinates of, and then basically develop those machine learning models to come up with likely sites that we haven't actually already captured. And to complement that kind of work, we also used other kinds of open source information, in particular OpenStreetMaps here. So here we can basically pull out that open source information and start to build out the data set relatively easily. So using that kind of combination of the open source information as well as the kind of machine learning approach, we were able to build up the data sets and provide the exact location for each asset. And then alongside all of this work, we also did a lot of work on mapping the locations to the actual owners themselves. So here we're mapping it onto the direct owner or the subsidiary, as well as all the way through to the ultimate parent. So here we're basically providing that kind of ownership chain, as well as providing unique identifiers for each of those sort of subsidiary parent pairings, which can be linked directly into some financial information as well. So we're providing unique identifiers such as legal entity identifiers and ticker and exchange information to allow that sort of pulling in of the financial information as well. So that's sort of the process that we use to sort of build up the data set, the location of the assets as well as the ownership. We were also interested in the actual characteristics of the sites themselves. So here we undertook some annotation work through the help of some crowdsourcing to actually start to tease out some of that information as well. So here we're looking at some cement sites which have been annotated, and here we're looking at trying to identify some of the key characteristics which can help to categorize these sites, as well as starting to use that information about the spatial extent, as well as the sort of number and dimensions of key characteristics to actually tease out information such as capacity. So here we're looking at sort of the extent of the sites as well as those key characteristics which can be used to pull in that extra information about what the site actually is doing and the size of the site. So that's sort of the overall process that we use to kind of build these data sets from the ground up. And then this is just sort of an illustration of the spatial distribution of the sites that we've managed to capture within the cement data set. So here we're capturing over 3,000 sites. So it's a mixture of integrated and grinding plants, which we've estimated accounts for approximately 90% of global cement production capacity. So here, some of the key gaps are still within China, but for all the largest publicly traded producers, the coverage is much closer to 100%. Looking now at our iron and steel data set, so here we've captured a whole host of different types of cement production, steel production sites. So that includes the likes of sites that are dealing with the procurement and processing of raw materials, so such as coking plants and pelletization plants. We've also obviously captured the crude steel production plants, so integrated plants as well as mini mills. We've also captured a whole host of downstream plants, so those include the likes of rolling mills as well as coating plants. So overall, our data set captures nearly 1,600 assets, which we've estimated accounts for around 70% of global crude steel production. But we've also been working closely with Global Energy Monitor, who have produced their own steel plant tracker. And we're working on basically producing a merged, consistent data set, which actually provides a more comprehensive overview of the steel sector. So we're also going to be obviously working on updating these data sets on a regular basis, filling in some of the gaps, as well as ensuring that the data sets are providing the most up-to-date information as possible. So to sort of finish off, I just wanted to touch on a couple of example use cases for these data sets. So the first is around the kind of spatial dimension of the data sets themselves. So here we're providing exact locations for every single asset. And using that, we can start to actually overlay some spatial layers. So here we've got an example looking at water stress. So we can easily start to overlay those kind of spatial dimensions to actually understand the overall exposure and vulnerability. And then finally, we can also start to undertake some more detailed assessments. So we're providing those detailed characteristics about the sites themselves, and all this information can be used to start to kind of estimate things like emissions. So these kind of emission estimates can then be fed into some transition risk models. So here we're looking at a carbon lock-in curve methodology that we've developed at Oxford. And using this type of approach, we can actually start to understand the relative alignment of assets, as well as the alignment of the entire sector as a whole. So that was a very quick overview of kind of what we've been working on. So as mentioned, these data sets are now openly available, so they can be downloaded from the Spatial Finance Initiative website. So if you are interested in either of these sectors or interested in the work that we've been doing, then please feel free to download from there. But other than that, thank you very much, and I'll hand you over to Caitlin.
I think, Matt, you're actually handing over to me.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. Hi, thank you so much, Matt, and hello everyone. My name is Nicola Ranger. I'm the Deputy Director of the Centre for Greening Finance and Investment, and I have the pleasure of working with Matt and Christoph and Ben and team. So I'm going to very briefly introduce the next panel. But before I do so, let me just again congratulate Matt and Christoph and Ben and team for this really great achievement of releasing these new open data sets, which I think will be really transformational in this space. So congratulations, and yeah, it's great to be part of the team doing this. But now I'm even more delighted to introduce our panel for the final quarter of this event. So we're going to hear from 4 speakers, as Ben introduced earlier, so I'll briefly just go through them again. So we're going to hear from Caitlin Swalek from the Global Energy Monitor, then we will hear from Matt Gray from Transition Zero, Alvaro Linares Fuster from Willis Towers Watson, and then finally Naomi Klein from Asset Resolution. So please go ahead, looking forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you for that warm introduction. And thank you, Christoph and Matt, for inviting me here to speak about Global Energy Monitor's Global Steel Plant Tracker. Global Energy Monitor is a nonprofit research think tank that collects asset level data sets for different parts of the energy sector. And then we recently moved into industry as well with our steel plant tracker. Next slide, please. So the Global Steel Plant Tracker has a 3-part structure. First, we have an online interface, which is on the globalenergymonitor.org website. And this includes a mapping feature and a dashboard that provides some data visualization and summary stats from the tracker. In the tracker view, you can view the steel plants by capacity, which is really interesting and telling for pulling out some of those trends about where the different steelmaking processes are and where steel production is really concentrated. Each steel plant in our tracker also has a wiki page associated with it, which provides detailed background information on the plant, as well as project details that reflect what we have in our underlying database, which is the 3rd part. of the global steel plant tracker infrastructure. So this database currently provides location, ownership, operating status, capacity, production, steelmaking process, and some furnace level detail for all of the steel plants. In our next update, we're going to be adding information on workforce, emissions, ISO certifications, and really expanding out that detailed furnace unit data and completing the data we've already begun collecting on products and end users. Our collection methodology is a bit different than Spatial Finance Initiative. As Matt and Christoph described, we are going through company disclosures and government documents to pull out that information. And we have researchers based in some of these different countries, especially like China and India, where language is trickier to do that ground level research. So I think our two methodologies really complement each other well. Next slide, please. So the current thresholds for our tracker, we have all of the plants that are over 1 million tons per annum crude steel production in the database right now. And in early 2022, we'll be releasing an update that will include all plants of 500,000 tons per annum or greater for crude iron or steel capacity. So that will include some of the DRI plants or blast furnace plants that don't produce crude steel, but they do produce iron. And as Matt described, we're working together very closely to provide an option to really join our databases together so you can really have that breadth and depth of data between the two data sets. Next slide, please. Global Energy Monitor also just put out our first major report about the Global Steel Plant Tracker. So this reviewed the information in the tracker, and then also looking at steel industry climate targets. There's been a lot of roadmaps coming out recently about how to decarbonize the steel industry, and there's some really clear things that need to happen. So first, shifting away from blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace steelmaking to electric arc furnace steelmaking. And so having these asset level databases is really important because we'll be able to track that. And we know that there's a lot of new, novel, low emission steelmaking technologies coming online, hydrogen-based DRI, carbon capture and storage. And these are projected to come on in the next 5 to 10 years or so. And if these reach commercial scale at that speed, the steel industry is going to face 47 to 70 billion US dollars in stranded asset risk. Next slide, please. And this is really, the reason this is happening is because in the next 10 years, most steel plants are also going to be facing reinvestment cycles and making decisions about whether to continue operating the units that they have currently or to replace them with lower emission steelmaking technology. So the timing for making those decisions is going to be very tricky for plant operators. And that's why it's really important for us to have these databases where we can be tracking what steelmaking processes are being used and the capacity levels. Next slide, please. So the final finding that I'll touch on here is that overcapacity is still an ongoing issue in the steel industry. We see places like China, the US, the EU, Japan that have really high amounts of overcapacity. And this creates issues for steel demand, but there's also an opportunity because it means that it's possible to shut down some of the higher emission steel making plants without affecting the global supply of steel. Next slide, please. So I'll finish up there, but very open to discussing more and continuing this conversation. And thanks again for having me here.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Nicola, and hello, everyone. So my name is Matthew Gray, co-CEO of Transition Zero. Transition Zero is a mission-driven analytics provider. We provide data science, or we combine data science and financial modeling to help improve information flows and decision-making as we make the transition to a zero carbon economy. I'm going to use the time that I have to talk about how we can use asset level data to improve information flows in the steel industry. Before I get started, I'll just add to the chorus of congratulations to Christoph, Matt, and others for getting these asset level data sets done. I know our engineering teams have been bugging you for a long time about when they'll be available, so great to see them out in the public. Next slide, please. So this is a high-level understanding of the data value chain from our perspective. It all starts with high-quality asset-level databases like those developed by Spatial Finance Initiative and Global Energy Monitor. What we then do is we try to understand productivity or production of those assets in near real time. And the reason we want to do that is because we are principally interested in financial, economic, and environmental analysis. So an example of financial analysis will be trying to understand whether a steel plant is making money or not. An example of economic analysis will be trying to understand the marginal cost of a steel mill relative to its peers and low carbon alternatives. And environmental analysis is predicting carbon emissions and other environmental variables in near real time. And then that data and analytics needs to get in the hands of the right people at the right time, in the right way to have the desired impact, which of course is decarbonisation. Next slide, please. So this is a high-level overview of how we model steel. So steel production can be categorized two ways: blast furnace and electric arc furnace. We use satellite imagery to estimate production from blast furnaces. Next slide, please. And the reason we're able to do this is because these assets emit a lot of heat. So this is a modified satellite image of a steel mill in Germany. And as you can see, there is red dots that we've identified in this image, and they represent heat. And heat, based on the modeling that we have done, is a good proxy for production. Next slide, please. So this is our data, our monthly data for steel production in Germany, and we've compared it against the World Steel Association, which is one of the only organizations that provides monthly data at country level. So the yellow line is production, total production from the World Steel Association. The blue line is our predictions, and the dotted red line is World Steel Association disaggregation based on those units that are producing from blast furnaces. Currently, our models achieve a error of around 10%, and that is something that we are constantly improving. And again, that's why I stress that asset level data is so important, because when it comes to modeling, the quality of the outputs are only as good as the quality of the inputs. So if we have incorrect asset level data, then it is going to affect the accuracy of our results. Next slide, please. This chart here shows our monthly results for the facility that I showed in the previous two slides. And as you can see, production does vary significantly based on the modeling that we have done. And this is an important point for a couple of reasons. Firstly, a lot of models tend to use annual country level disaggregation as a way of working out what's happening at asset level. And the reason for that is to date that the quality is typically only provided at country level. There is one issue with that, and that is production does vary significantly at asset level and over time. So using those disaggregation models can potentially mislead decision makers. Next slide, please. So I want to come back to this issue of action. This is an overview of a report that we did earlier this year called Turning the Supertanker, which looked at China's coal-fired fleet of power plants, and it applied the same logic that we have used for steel, cement, aluminium facilities. So we applied data science. So we used optical images looking at the plume coming out of a flue stack or cooling tower of a coal-fired power plant, and tried to understand or use that as a proxy for understanding productivity or utilization. And then what we did with that data is we did a range of financial analysis. So you can see from the chart there, from one plant that we've identified, we were able to calculate generation, CO2 emissions, operating costs, and profitability in near real time. And it's important to note that this data is not publicly available, so there is no plant level emissions or production estimates in China. So this is why we tend to use these data science techniques. We did a range of things with that report, and I've listed some of the ways that that report hopes to influence decision makers. But the main finding was that we found China could replace its existing fleet of coal-fired power plants with zero carbon alternatives, and in doing so save $1.6 trillion US. Next slide, please. So back to this point about that I previously made about getting data and analytics into the hands of the right people at the right time in the right way. We're lucky enough to have a relationship with Al Gore's office because of a coalition that we co-founded called Climate Trace. Al Gore offered to give embargo copies of the report to John Kerry, and then John Kerry gave those copies of the report to the Chinese delegation when they met for the Biden Climate Summit. And according to Al Gore, that report and the findings of the report may have influenced China's decision after that summit to become a lot more stricter on new coal build, and also making statements about rationalizing capacity from 2025 onwards. Next slide, please. So this is a very high-level overview. What I would say is that what I've talked about in steel, we've also been working on or developing similar approaches in cement, aluminium, chemicals, and pulp and paper. And if you do have any questions, feel free to get in touch. Also worth mentioning, our data is publicly available too. So we look forward to sharing our data, and we are in discussions with the Spatial Finance Initiative and Global Energy Monitor about getting this data onto their data sets. So I will just leave it there. Thank you for your time and look forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was really super. So now over to Alvaro.
Thank you, Nicola. Well, just to say that it's a pleasure to be here. And today I'm going to give you a high-level overview of how at Willis Towers Watson we use asset-level data to assess physical, transition, and liability climate risks. Next slide, please. Well, as Christoph and the previous speakers have summarized really well, climate risk can be assessed at different levels of granularity, ultimately linking back to real assets. Therefore, understanding their characteristics, their operations, supplier dependencies, or associated revenues and costs is going to be essential when assessing climate risks at different hierarchical levels, from the entity level to the portfolio level. Next slide, please. And just to say that today I'm going to focus on a high-level example for the utilities sector. Next slide. Thank you. So for the physical risk assessment, the first thing we do at Willis Towers Watson is to develop what we call transmission channels for each type of real asset, drawing on the expertise of risk engineers and experienced consultants. So these transmission channels capture the pathways in which climate hazards can affect directly and indirectly the real asset, and how those effects can be reflected in liability risks and impacts to relevant valuation drivers. This is developed across the life cycle stages of the asset. We then use 3 techniques to assess both the direct and indirect impacts. So first, we use probabilistic catastrophe models. They are very effective in quantifying acute impacts in financial terms. We also develop bespoke chronic climate impact models. So understanding the operations and criticalities of each asset, we develop models that quantify the expected impact of chronic climate changes. And finally, we also use macroeconomic models, so giving us a view of how changes in the wider market caused by climate change can impact the assets. And it is important to note also that given the uncertainties in climate-related hazards, but also, as you know, in asset vulnerability and the asset exposure, that quantification of physical risk is very challenging. And only some of these pathways can ultimately be quantified. However, for the pathways that cannot be quantified, it is still very important to define them in detail and account for them in the risk assessment done by financial institutions, because they could be much more material than the pathways that were quantified. Next slide, please. So to do this assessment effectively, we need, in some cases, to first construct globally consistent datasets where we can have the flexibility of integrating the vulnerability of the assets and resilience engines at different granularities. So fitting the needs of end users, or in other words, one size does not fit all in physical climate risk. However, there are many challenges we encounter in capturing such a globally consistent dataset. So from each dataset exhibiting different granularities in asset characteristics to finding differences in accuracy for physical or valuation attributes. And also when combining different data sources, you can find that they are developed with different standards or methodologies. So that's why I think there is so much value in the work that SFI is doing together with their partners here today, as we have just heard a few minutes ago, and we'll hear after this talk, in developing consistent data sets with transparent methodologies and standards. So, and a great example of this just being the cement, iron and steel asset level database that is being launched today. That's great. Next slide, please. Thanks. Yeah, so here I show an example of the physical risk quantification for one utility asset. So acute climate events such as flooding or lightning storms, as we know, can cause business interruptions, affecting the yield or production of certain assets. And they can also cause direct damage, thus increasing the OPEX or maintenance CAPEX. And all these, as you see, can have big uncertainties in the analysis. We shouldn't forget about the chronic impacts, which can affect the asset's production and efficiency. For example, in thermal power plants, leading to reductions in yield or increases in CAPEX. So I wanted to show this example, which we've seen quite a lot in our analysis for financial institutions, where we see that for some assets, the climate physical risk impact is dominated by chronic changes, being sometimes an order of magnitude larger than acute impacts. So what I wanted to highlight is the importance of assessing both chronic and acute changes in physical risk assessment. And yeah, next slide, please. Thanks. Yeah, finally, I also wanted to add this slide highlighting the importance of integrating asset level intelligence also in transition risk assessments, which can reveal which assets within a portfolio are at risk of lowering in value or even becoming stranded in a transition to a low carbon economy. What does also here showing what assets are more risky to hold than to divest. So for example, the ones that are below that dash line. And all this information can help financial institutions and corporates to make resilient investments and strategic planning. Yeah, so that's me. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please do ask them or keep in touch with me. Thanks.
Thank you, Alvaro. That's a really interesting presentation. And last but most definitely not least, Naomi, over to you.
Thanks, Nicola. And thank you, Christophe and Ben, for organizing the event. It's great to see the momentum around spatial finance, and by not only the caliber of the speakers, but also the number of attendees and the fact that many of them are still around. And again, congrats for the data set. This is something we had been following for a while, and it's great to see it coming to fruition. So my name is Naomi Klein, and I'm the CEO of Asset Resolution. And I'm going to give another perspective on the use of asset level data by the financial sector through what we do. And to set the scene, a few words on Asset Resolution. We are a commercial provider of asset-based data, but we were born out of research from the 2 Degrees Investing Initiative, which is a leading think tank in the area of sustainable finance. And they thought about asset level data when they started looking at portfolio alignment. And the main data that was available back then was corporate reported data, which is a great starting point, but it's not transparent, always not necessarily granular enough, not up to date and not consistent. So they decided to look at asset level data and started research a few years ago. Next slide, please. So as we're coming close to dinner time, I'm going to use a food-related analogy. And in practice, what we do is bake a base cake and then add flavors and colors. And the base cake is something that Christophe spoke about, Matt and Alvaro just now, although they call them slightly differently. And the base cake is the backbone that links the asset level data, so the real economy, to the financial world. So all the ownership chain, and the flavors and the colors are the asset-based insights and information and tools that you can derive from that, and that financial institutions can use to transition to a low carbon world. Or even broader, we heard about biodiversity in the previous panel. So this backbone can also be used to look at these challenges. So in the next few minutes, I'll focus on what makes a strong base cakes and what colors and flavors of cakes we can add on that. And as I think one of the starting point, as Matt Gray say, is to have a high quality base cake or data to start with. And next slide, please. So as I said, the base cake is this backbone that links real assets to the financial world. And what is important for investors is that they can come with information on their portfolio and they can look down and see what real assets are in the portfolio, and vice versa, look at a specific asset and go all the way up the ownership chain and see who owns these assets. And this is what we do. So we build this base cake. We do not create asset level data. So it was really interesting to hear other panelists say how they do create this data. We source the best data that is out there and we consolidate it. I think it's Alvaro who said that the different data sources out there are not consistent. They're prepared in a different way. So what we do is we consolidate, clean, and normalized. And we do that for over 300,000 assets, real assets across 9 sectors, high emitting sectors, as we come from the climate angle. And we link them to about 60,000 companies. And then what you have as a result is a consistent and comparable framework to look at assets in your portfolio and companies in your portfolio, because they're all looked at differently and you have the same set of characteristics. So there is one entry point for financial institutions to look at the portfolio and do some analysis. And once you have this strong base cake, you can add the flavors. So what we cover is, for example, location. We've heard from various panelists that this is key, obviously, and that can enable you to do, for example, physical risks analysis. So for us, you will have information at the level of the asset and the company aggregation. Greenhouse gas metrics, for example. So you can look at the emissions intensity and absolute emissions at the level of the asset, but also aggregated by technology and by country at the country level. So we can tell you Entergy in Brazil has an emissions intensity of X for this type of technology. And that can enable financial institutions to look at the finance emission, for example. And an important aspect that is historical for us, but is something that we believe key, is the forward-looking component of the data that enable people to look at their portfolio now and how it's going to evolve in the future, including the production, so the capex plans, and whether this is aligned with low carbon transition pathways. And I say this is historical because the data was prepared to be used, the initial data to be used under the PACTA tool that some of you might know, and it's about alignment of portfolios with the transition. So when we look at these questions, the main challenge is how, and I think other panelists mentioned that, is how can people trust this data? How can we trust this data? So how do you build this strong base case, and who provide the ingredients, whether this is commercially sourced, whether this is open source? And the bottom line is really that you're looking for quality, accuracy, ease of use, so in a format that can be easily ingested, long-term visibility on the availability. So you want to make sure that if you start ingesting and using a data source, it's not going to disappear in the next couple of years. And then licensing. So what can you do? Does it enable you to use the data and use the data in a tool, for example, that you then can offer to your clients, or that financial institutions themselves develop internally? And there is no one size fits all, because the different data fields are not necessarily consistent across sectors, and they don't all have the same value, and they are not all sourced in the same way. And we had really interesting presentation by the previous panelist on what kind of information is sourced, what is measured, what is estimated. And for the current base cake, what we need is the name of the asset, the location, ownership is key as well. And all these things, we see them appearing as open source data set, which is really exciting, because the more people can have access to this consolidated and validated data set, the more harmonization you will have and comparability in the results. Then there are other flavors or ingredients of the base cake, because the base cake will evolve as information becomes available, is, for example, emissions reduction. At the moment, there is still a lot of estimates, but the better your estimate will be when your ingredients or your data inputs are increasing in quality. So I think this is also something we'll see in the near future. The more these open source databases are appearing and expand, the more there is crowdsourcing in how we collect the data, the better we will have, the better the databases there will be. And I think for us, it's important, because then we can focus on the analytics and the tools, which is where the value is added is largest. So I will stop on that, and I thank again the SFI and the Global Energy Monitor, and also what Matt is doing for the work, and I look forward to further engaging on these topics, because we're very excited by this data and by being able to use them.
Thank you so much. That was a brilliant presentation, and you've made me very, very hungry for cake now. So could all of the panelists, as well as Matt, please turn on their videos again, and we have about 7 minutes or so for some final questions. So please, audience, please do put your questions in the Q&A and I'll read those out. To get started, while people are adding their questions, let me start off with one question I have. So we've heard about a number of sort of more commercial services, a number of open services. My question is about how important is it that the core data sets are open? What's the role of these sort of open versus more commercial baseline data sets? And maybe you could begin with that to give some reflections.
Thanks, Nicola. And I think for some of the foundational building blocks, like allocations, like name, like ownership, things that don't necessarily move and that are static, I think this would be a great entry point. And I think having open source approach can help validation, because then it provides a consistent framework that everyone can use. And then if we can move then the needle to have production data, for example, like Matt Gray presented, and have something that is also transparent there, it's great, because then again, if we all share this foundation, then we can focus on other added services or added analysis, be it research or commercial, on looking at tools that can be used by financial institutions to then take action. So we don't need to spend time on what can be automatically generated, crowdsourced, and we can really spend time on the pushing the boundaries.
Thank you so much. Any other reflections on that from any of the other panel? Or I'll fire another question at you.
I can jump in quickly. So I would agree that it is essential for these asset level data sets to be publicly available. And I'm speaking from the perspective of Transition Zero. We want to be as open as possible, and that's difficult to do if it's a commercial data set, because they place all sorts of constraints on you. So the more open it is, I think the more transparent and more accurate information flows will be.
Thank you.
I'd like to quickly add on to, from Global Energy Monitor's perspective, this is an ongoing conversation we're having, and I think we're overall feeling that more open and transparent data is a good thing. Having industry and policy folks using the same data is really helpful. And especially in the steel industry, we see that things like capacity and production can be reported quite differently from different companies, the way they define these different terms. And so having open data sources where everybody has the information in the same place, could bring some alignment. And I think especially with steel, when we're looking at standards and certifications programs like Responsible Steel, being big tools for decarbonizing the industry, having these, transparent data sets will be key for achieving that.
Thank you. I'd like to jump to a second question. So there's a question from the audience: who's actually buying all this data? But maybe let me rephrase that as how are you seeing these data sets are already being used? So in particular, are you seeing the big players, the big asset managers, the big asset owners actually using these data sets? And maybe you could share some experience on that.
Sorry, Nicola, did you say my name?
I didn't, but please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, great question. Well, I think that the key role that this type of open source asset level database is going to play, especially from a climate change angle, I think is going to become one of the foundations of the analytic approaches for assessing climate risk materiality, I think, for financial institutions. And I think it is because they provide the best intelligence about asset and entity level exposure, which it doesn't only allow you to capture the exposure well, but it also allows you to basically understanding the asset operations and dependencies, and let you then capture the vulnerability as well. In terms of constraints, I think, as we discussed today, one is consistency. We have discussed that a lot, so I'll mention a couple others. I think one is basically also the linkage between the asset and the entity level, or the owner or operator. But yeah, I think these two, and with the work that SFI is doing and their partners, I think we can close the gap in this. And I think the last one that I usually think about when applying this for financial institutions is that when we do these climate risk assessments, we assume that many times that the exposure is constant. So there is that's a big assumption, especially in the context of climate change, when we look at not only present day physical risk but decades ahead. So this ties also with financial institutions. They hold their investments for 1, 2, or 3 years many times. So I think it's important to also think of these data sets, not only of capturing the present day exposure and vulnerability or value, but also it can help us to think of what if scenarios. So, you know, what if I invest in this region? What if I invest in this other sector? And that can be also really useful for financial institutions, especially when they are thinking about the strategic planning.
Thank you. And I'm happy to quickly jump in there as well. So we see the interest that is increasing from financial institutions. So a few years ago, people were satisfied with corporate reported data. And now people want to go further. They really want to look under the hood and understand what sits under, because they need this confidence in the data, and also because it brings them a cross-check of the data that they get from their counterparts. So there are really various drivers. And so to answer your initial questions, yes, people are using this data. We're working with global banks, which are our clients, and they do see the value in asset-based information. We're also working with global consultancies and data providers, which also see the value of this data, because they see the same push. They need something more granular, more transparent, and that can be ultimately validated and understood and trusted.
Thank you. So we're getting a lot of questions in about, you know, how do we do a business model for open data, about quality, about reference data. Unfortunately, we only have 4 minutes left. So I'm going to just fire one question, if I may, to our 4 panelists. And Matt, you're also very welcome. Can you give us like a one statement on what would you like to see going forward from the Spatial Finance Initiative and also the Centre for Greening Finance and Investment? If we can do something in this space to be really impactful and really drive forward this agenda, what would you like to see? And sorry, I didn't prep you for this before, but Naomi, I know you can cope with this. So what's your sentence?
Can you say that again?
So what do you want to see from the Spatial Finance Initiative next?
I think more sectors. So I think that what you guys did on cement and steel is brilliant. The discussions you're having with the Global Energy Monitor in bringing things together is great. And I think this is also another point that one of I was looking at the comments, that's why you caught me off guard. It was saying, oh yeah, but open source is not a silver bullet. There is no free lunch, right? So also it's having visibility on the long-term availability of the data, because it's always a bit of a question, right? It's like, yeah, great, there is this nice data source. How long will it stay there? And then a third one is maybe pushing again the needle a bit further in terms of what else can be open source, what doesn't make sense to be open source in terms of business models, in terms of level of effort that is required to get the data, because in some cases, it will make sense to have it commercial. So this is the third point, maybe having some thinking around that would be very helpful.
Thank you. Matt, do you have Matt Gray, I should say, do you have a one sentence?
Yeah, sure. So I think I would have two suggestions. The first would be expanding to other sectors and refining the data sets that you've already published. The second would probably be around training the financial community with regards to what spatial finance can and cannot do. As Naomi said, it's not a silver bullet, but it is just another tool in the toolbox. And, you know, going back to Naomi's cake analogy, a lot of additional effort needs to be done to get these data and analytics to a level where finances can use it for investment advice.
So we're down to our last minute. Alvaro, can you do something in 3 words?
I'm gonna try. Well, that's I think one additional thing that SFI could do is also helping on the uptake of these data sets. And I think a good way of doing that is maybe creating use cases or publicizing the evidence of successful application of them. So that I think that would be fantastic.
Thank you. And Caitlin, a final word to you?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think I meet with Matt and Christoph about once a week to have these conversations about how to continue building the GEM and SFI data sets together. So I think that will really be our goal going forward, just continuing that collaboration and moving into other industries, as folks have said.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the panel and to Matt McCartan as well for the excellent presentation. It's been, yeah, really great, very insightful. Thank you so much for your time. So it falls to me to close this session. So thank you to everyone for taking part and to all of our audience. It's been a great discussion. Thank you for the questions as well. Going forwards for us, this work is continuing, it's expanding, as Ben laid out at the beginning, into new sectors. It's also forming part of the new Centre for Greening Finance and Investment. So we will be working on the case studies as well. And really, we want this community to continue, and particularly hopefully post-pandemic as well, we can all get together and really sort of advance this community collectively. A final thing that I'll mention as well that we're doing as part of the new centre, so that's all about catalyzing innovation as well. So, we will be, for example, working with Innovate UK to continue to support this area and setting up innovation labs, etc. So lots of really exciting things on the horizon there as well. So thank you all so much again. It's been a really wonderful session, and I look forward to seeing you all for the next one soon, hopefully. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.